Hello, and welcome to Let's Be Honest with your host, Just Johnda. I am your attorney friend, that person that you go to that'll say all the things that you don't want to say, and a lot of times has nothing to do with cases at all. But lately, these legal streets, especially as it relates to some of your favorite or maybe not so favorite, depending on who we're talking about, celebs, politicians, etc., have been littered with foolishness, for want of a better way of putting it. So, we're going to put aside some of our other topics that we really need to get back to, especially some of the fun stuff. And we are going to get right back into um, the Wendy Williams and Diddy of it all. So, this is part two of so you're just going to play in our faces. And as I said in the last episode, given some of the other things that have been going on this week, we are probably going to have a part three and possibly even part four of the So You're Just Going to Play in Our Faces series this week, because there were things that jumped into the middle of this when I already had episodes planned. So without further ado, I'm going to get into part two, because part one was supposed to be about Wendy Williams and the latest disturbing accusations against Sean P. Diddy Combs. But the Wendy Williams piece was pretty involved. So we just let that go where it's going to go. And now we are going to circle back to this the Sean P. Diddy Combs saga drama. It is like the song that never ends, except that, although a bit of an annoying earworm, is still kind of a happy thing. Seems like when it comes to the P. Diddy of it all, not so happy, but we are going to get into it. So, like me, you may have been sort of surprised, not so surprised with what we all woke up to on, I would say, yesterday, but since it's the wee hours of the morning, I guess now yesterday would be Wednesday. So now we're going to say Tuesday. I believe, what was Tuesday? Tuesday, September 24th. Now, I say surprised and not so surprised, because I think most of us anticipated that there would be that the floodgates were going to open up in one way or another as it relates to Sean Combs, whether it was additional lawsuits, which New York, at least, still has the door open for them. And we're going to get into the how and why of that in a bit when we go over the law that allowed initially, when we started to see more of this last year, at least as it relates to Sean Combs, the law that allowed Cassie to file beyond what would have been a traditional statute of limitations for a civil matter of this kind, and what has allowed the young woman who we're going to talk about tonight to file as well. So, so there's gender-based violence situation that we'll get into, and we'll talk about more then. So again, not so surprised that more could potentially be coming out one way or another, whether it was a lawsuit or just folks just talking, because now that he's gotten indicted, you're going to have a number of things going on. You're going to have individuals who feel more emboldened to talk about their experiences or their alleged experiences. You are also going to have individuals who may speak, but in a manner that they feel is kind of defending him. A lot of people do that and don't realize they may be doing more harm than good sometimes, depending on what they say. I was at the party. It wasn't so bad. Yeah, I mean, there was some drugs, there was some this, there was some that, but I mean, I did hear some no's, and there were some folks shipped in from different area codes, but I mean, it was all good. Yeah, don't say that. um and of course, as the case unfolds, you'll have individuals who may speak out in defense of themselves because of potential implications in certain things. So again, expected the floodgates to open, but not quite in this way, because Tuesday morning started with a press conference, and boy, was it something. I mean, we had Lisa Bloom a couple of weeks ago filing the case with Dawn Richard, but then lo and behold, a special treat. Lisa Bloom's mom, the OG, Gloria Allred, who appeared. So again, we were hit with this image on Tuesday morning, which was Gloria Allred and a young woman. I'm going to call her TG. Her name is in the case, but at a press conference announcing that not only was this individual going to be that she had filed a case, but the allegations were nothing short of horrifically stunning. Excuse me. And again, given what I do for a living, having spent over 20 years as a criminal defense attorney and years doing the family law and domestic work and lots of other things, you know, it's not like it's anything new under the sun for me, but that these are things about someone who people feel like they know because they've watched him for so many years. Just shocking the conscience in terms of its level of detail, which may or may not be true. These are all allegations, but still very, very disturbing. And I think that what made it more disturbing and triggering, I'm going to take her face down, more disturbing and triggering for many people is that, unlike some of the other cases and allegations, because Cassie Ventura's allegations were disturbing as well, unlike a lot of those situations where you did not get a face or a person actually talking about it to the public and getting that emotion and all of that stuff, this person actually did come out with an attorney at a press conference and actually share some of the distress that she alleges she has been going through since the alleged incident. And so I think that that's the piece that shocked the conscience a little bit more. I know for me, I don't usually see that even in my line of work, unless or until I receive a potential video interview from the prosecution's office of the victim, if they were interviewed via video, or possibly not even until until that victim or is in court, or the alleged victim, depending on where we are in the matter. So to see that ahead of time, and then on top of it to read the allegations, it was a lot. And I think it was a lot for the general public. So we're going to jump in, trigger warning, because while I am going to try to soft shoe some of the details, there's only but so many different ways you can do that and tell a story. I will I will be, excuse me, for those who are listening on the podcast, I'm going to have something to drink. I'm going into my second hour of talking, and so my voice is showing me that it's not my friend right now. So, so excuse a little frog there, but I'm gonna try not to keep making that horrendous noise of clearing it. I am a person who is evidence that misophonia is real. I hate any kind of bizarre noises from the mouth. I can't watch mukbang videos. I can't do any of that. So I try not to do it when I am podcasting or appearing. So I'm going to do my best, even though it's the middle of the night and we're entering hour 2 of filming episodes. Okay, so I'm going to pull this up right now for you all who are watching. And of course, for those who are just listening, I'm going to be reading it. So I still need it on the screen. Okay. And I'm going to change my screens a little bit so that I can read it big, because I won't hide that I am a person of a certain age and may need things a little bit bigger. All right, so this is a complaint that was filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. So this was filed in federal court. It just happens to be in the same court that Sean Combs is currently in for his criminal indictment, but this is on the other side in the civil division. So we have TG as the plaintiff. She is suing Sean Combs, Joseph Sherman. We'll get into Joseph Sherman in a bit. Daddy's House Recordings, Inc., CE Opco LLC, Combs Global, Combs Enterprises, Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Bad Boy Productions Holdings, Bad Boy Books Holdings, Bad Boy Records, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Productions LLC, and organizational does 1 through 10. So these are other entities that he may own that are yet named or unnamed. This individual is suing by and through her attorneys at the firms of Allred, Morocco, and Goldberg, and Cuddy Hecker Wang LLP. So she has a team that is involving 2 firms. Okay, so I'm going to do the introduction that kind of gives us a feel for the case. In or around the summer of 2001, the plaintiffs, we know plaintiff TG, her life was violently knocked off course when defendants Sean Combs and Joseph Sherman I am losing it here, viciously assaulted her, and we're talking about sexual assault, her at the Bad Boy Record Studio in New York City. Plaintiff was 25 at the time and dating one of Combs' employees, a relationship that Combs exploited to lure her into meeting him and Sherman alone. Once they successfully sequestered her, Combs and Sherman gave her a drink, likely laced with a drug, and that eventually caused her briefly to lose consciousness. She awoke to find herself bound and restrained. Just as an aside, we know that one of the drugs that was allegedly found during the raid of Sean Combs' premises related to the criminal case was GHB, popularly known as the date rape drug. Now, one of the things I want you to pay attention to as we're going through this is the language that is used. The firm clearly, like it was clear in the Dawn Richards case, used some of the language that is being used in the civil case that is not accidental. We will hear the word enterprise used several times, and they don't mean Bad Boy Enterprises. They are using the word enterprise because, as we know in the criminal case, that word is used to show or at least to attempt to show a conspiracy. So here, even though this is a civil matter, the civil matter is, or the civil claim is still based on allegations of criminal behavior. So that is something that you're going to do when you file a civil case that is based on allegations of criminal behavior. You're going to punch that up as much as possible. And in this case, the backdrop of this is this sweeping federal case against him. So that language is definitely going to be used. And we saw that in the Dawn Richard case as well. So Combs and Sherman. Sherman, by the way, is an individual who, at least at the time, was purported to be Sean Diddy Combs's bodyguard. So Combs and Sherman proceeded to brutally sexually abuse and violate plaintiff. Combs mercilessly violated her. Anally and vaginally. Sherman forcefully slammed plaintiff onto a table, slapped her, and repeatedly thrust himself into her mouth. Both men were undeterred by her cries for help throughout the attack. Now, again, you may hear me try to soft shoe the words a bit. That is because of Google, because this is also on YouTube. However, I'm not doing this. This is a legal case. So just reminding Google that I am reading these things specifically from the court documents. Plaintiff never recovered from defendant's violent assault. She had thoughts of taking her own life. She had the ideation of that and has received extensive psychological treatment because of the attack. For decades, she remained silent and did not report the crime out of fear that the defendants would use their power to ruin her life. And as they repeatedly, explicitly threatened to do. To this day, she suffers from severe depression, anxiety, and panic attacks and still lives in fear of defendants. And again, we're talking about roughly 22 years since then. I am not suggesting that she shouldn't feel this way. I just want to, again, remind you of the time frame that we are talking here. And quite frankly, that could work for or against, right? Because if you put individuals, as I'm sure they will, if this were to actually go to trial, there are experts who will certainly testify that the vestiges, if you will, of an attack, particularly a brutal attack, and it doesn't even have to be sexual, will stick with you. I mean, that's when we talk about it from a psychological standpoint. These are things that PTSD is made of. Any progress plaintiff had made in healing from the attack over the years was dramatically reversed on or about November 27, 2023, when she learned for the first time that Combs and Sherman had video recorded the horrific assault 22 years before and had shown the video to multiple men seeking to publicly degrade and humiliate both plaintiff and her boyfriend. Plaintiff could not believe that the defendants would record themselves committing such a gruesome crime and then proceed proudly and widely to disseminate the recording of it. She was distraught and sunk into a deep depression. She again considered ending her own life. We're going to get into a bit how that came to light. Again, as a reminder, we know that the Cassie Ventura case was filed in November 2023, and it more or less began to start a bigger boulder, because there was already one rolling downhill, but an even bigger boulder rolling downhill as it relates to individuals coming out about their experiences, whether via lawsuits or just going generally public with them against Combs and or a number of his associates. This action seeks redress for defendants' brutalizing, misogynistic, and violent attacks on plaintiffs starting in 2001 with their assault and continuing in subsequent years as they compounded her humiliation by showing the video of the assault to others. As it relates to showing videos, we know there's been allegations of videos in that were removed from his possession by the government. And as you all may recall, rapper 50 Cent, or 50 Cent, however you want to say it, talked about Diddy sending him a video, I believe, of Cassie in a compromising position with another individual. I believe he talked about that back in 2023, right after the Cassie lawsuit. Of course, as we know, with 50 Cent being the ultimate troll, who knows whether or not that is true. Word on the street is that by the way, as an aside, word on the street is that not only has he followed through on his threat to shop around a surviving Diddy documentary, but that he has indeed sold that. I'm looking for independent verification of that. If I find it, I'll probably just put it in the FNDD group on Facebook, but that's the word on the street. Defendant Sean Combs. So now we're talking about the parties. The parties, TG, we know she no longer lives in the New York area. She lives out of state. This tells us who Sean Combs is. And of course, he owns all of those entities mentioned earlier. He typically resides in California, but currently he is at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. I believe on the previous video, I said he was at Rikers, but he's at MDC in Brooklyn. Okay. His ownership in most of those companies is undisputed. The facts of Combs' ownership and titles at the Combs corporations enabled him to commit the unlawful sexual violence against plaintiff described herein, and to harass her and subsequently intimidate her into silence afterwards. So that is, again, a way of making sure that all of those entities are held responsible when we're talking about damages, that essentially he used all of those entities to control people, to control the narrative, to intimidate, because those entities gave him tentacles throughout the entertainment industry and beyond. And of course, from a monetary standpoint, you want to be able to pierce the corporate veil on those things by saying that he essentially has ownership in all of them and use them. That's important as well, even in the criminal case, when you talk about, again, this vast enterprise of entities that weaved in and out of those companies and used the power and might that those brought, both financially or with personnel and or even just as a means of intimidation and control, because of just how vast his influence was, and I guess is technically. He still has ownership in those things in the entertainment industry, and even in the fashion, and at least for a time in the beverage industry as well. So defendant Joseph Sherman, aka Big Joe, so when you say Big Joe, we're talking about the same person, is a male who on information and belief resides still in New York, and he was employed by Combs or by the corporations. Again, now you have an employee of these corporations, so it again brings the corporations into this during the relevant period. The facts of his ownership and titles and Sherman's titles at the Combs corporations enabled him to commit the unlawful act. So we're saying the fact that he was a part of this vast entity allowed him the ability to not only commit the act, but to harass and subsequently intimidate and silence the alleged victim. She goes through all of the enterprises and how they are, or all of the companies and how they are connected to Diddy, all of the holdings. So that's what this next few pages are about. And you have to establish that if you want them to be held responsible, especially for the money. And I don't say that to diminish what has gone on here. I say that as an attorney, you have to get to the money in a civil case because that is that's your resolution, money. If the person is found to be liable, then what's the punishment? It's a civil case, money. And you want to be able to open up the possibility for as much of it as possible from the court. And not only as much of it as possible, places that you could go after to get it. Even if because the court via jury or whatever can issue whatever kind of judgment they want to, but if it is just against that person and that person is like, I ain't got it, then you ain't gonna get it. The defendant's organizational does 1 through 10 are currently unknown entities who are owned by or at one point owned by Combs and or Sherman. So that just allows for the possibility of, as you go through the discovery process, if you find out that he owns something else, especially during the relevant time period, that you've already left room for it to wrap up, to bring it in. Each of the Combs corporations aided and abetted Combs and Sherman in committing the unlawful sexual violence against the plaintiff described and in harassing and subsequently intimidating her into silence after the assault. They provided Combs and Sherman with the studio office space where they committed the act and or with chattel, including recording equipment, storage equipment to record it and disseminate it. They are alter egos for Combs, completely dominated for him and used for his personal interests and to engage in wrongdoing to which harm the plaintiff and others, and serve or has served as vehicles for Combs to move, dispose of, and or insulate his assets, including in connection with his criminal activities, and to avoid compensating the victims of his many crimes, including plaintiff. Bravo on that paragraph. That is how you pull together what a person's, that is how you pull together the how and the why you are mentioning this person's corporations and why they should be a part of the suit. It's paragraphs like that that are going to be key in the RICO case that the feds have on the criminal side as well, because you want to be just that specific to say every single thing they had and did were a part of allowing the criminal behavior to move forward and insulating the individuals who were involved. And moreover, it also allowed you to cover your assets. Huge. Great paragraph. I'm loving you for that one. And that's paragraph number 15. That's going to be one of my star paragraphs in this. Okay, jurisdiction and venue, New York. We know why. Happened in New York, or allegedly happened in New York. At the time, everybody was in New York. All of those things. And it is subject matter jurisdiction in terms of it being in federal court. You have citizens who are currently in 2 different states and the amount exceeds $75,000. So she lives in the state. I won't say, even though it's here publicly, but I won't keep saying what it is. He lives in a totally different one. Plus, you meet the monetary threshold because clearly she's suing for more than $75,000. Venue is proper because a lot of the events happened there. And of course, you need this to be in New York anyway because of the Gender-Based Violence Act that allows you to well, not just the Gender-Based Violence Act, but you need it here because of the statute of limitations, because that is not something that is open in every state. That right now, at least I'll have to do some digging, but I do know, at least for now, you're good in New York. California's has already expired, but New York's was originally a year. They extended it. They extended it a year. We're going to get into that, and then again, that will underscore even more why New York is important. But the act allegedly occurred there anyway, so it's going to be New York no matter what. Plaintiff hereby demands a trial by jury on her claims in this action. Of course, if you get a trial by jury, that's if they find in her favor, especially if they find in her favor, which would mean that they believe that the acts that she claims happen more likely than not, then the verdict would be huge, especially based on these allegations. So the first section is the background. It just tells you who the two parties are. Her paragraph is smaller. I'm a regular person. My parents immigrated to New York. I lived there at the time and at all times relevant when this action allegedly took place. And later on, we'll get into how she became acquainted with these individuals. Pretty simple. She was dating someone who worked for him. I guess he was sort of on the periphery of his inner circle, maybe even sort of kind of on the inner circle at the time. And so, of course, attended events with that person, and I'm assuming became on a first name basis with Mr. Combs. So that is basically who they are. There is a couple of paragraphs here that talk about, and they're going to get into it a lot later, but already planting the seed. They talk about Combs allegedly having a long history of violence and of abusing and sexually assaulting women. And there have been several civil lawsuits filed against him in the past year alleging sexual violence and abuse. On September 16, 2024, he was arrested and charged with racketeering and sex trafficking. He was denied bail. So this is a lawsuit that they probably had already been drafting, but were sure to get the most current information in there. Quite strategic on their part. I get it. They tell you who Big Joe was, that at the time he was employed by Combs as his bodyguard and head of security during the relevant time period and served in various roles in the Combs Corporation. He's founder of Rhymes and Dimes magazine, a New York State registered corporation, and through or in connection with that company that he produces and distributes pornography. On information and belief, he's even distributed videos of his or his friends' assaults through the company. Not sure how they know that, but this is what they're claiming. Now we get into how they met, because again, it's the background. So they claim that in or around late 99, early 2000, through her then boyfriend, who was an executive at Bad Boy. So again, he was in the circle, he was in the mix. And in addition to working together, he and the boyfriend had a close personal relationship. She frequently visited her boyfriend because he was her boyfriend at Bad Boy Studio in New York and attended events hosted at Combs's residence. And we know he's famous for his parties. He loves letting everybody know about his parties. Over that time, she became familiar with her and he knew about her relationship with the boyfriend. Now, we're getting into it. Defendants trick, drug, and violently assault her. In or about the summer of 2001, she allegedly received a phone call from Combs concerning her boyfriend's employment at Bad Boy. Combs told her he wanted to meet with her in person to discuss performance issues. Who knows? And again, they knew each other at that point on a personal level, maybe not necessarily her and Combs, but she certainly knew that there was a close relationship with the boyfriend. It's going to be interesting if it ever comes out what that was. But again, if folks are partying together, the discussion could have literally been about anything. I think for any Combs apologists, this is going to be one that they're going to seize on. I could definitely see people who want to go, oh, well, she went over there knowing what was going on. Why would she be going to speak with him about her partner? That doesn't even make any sense. We already know. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Her boyfriend was determined to climb up the ladder at Combs' records label, and as his romantic partner, she was committed to helping him. Okay, that's justifying why you went. We get it. She agreed to meet with him. In retrospect, it was evidently a sick and twisted way of using his ownership of and title at Bad Boy and its affiliate entities to abuse plaintiff and also to show his power and ability to humiliate her boyfriend, his executive. Again, bringing in the company and the use of the company and position. Clever, clever. A few hours later, Combs arrived at her mother's residence in Queens with Sherman, who was employed by Combs as his bodyguard at the same time. Sherman was driving an SUV and Combs was in the back seat. She entered the vehicle. He offered her a glass of wine and she accepted. So they picked her up. Combs began discussing his alleged concerns about her boyfriend's performance at work. Meanwhile, as she drank what was handed to her, she started to feel lightheaded, dizzy, and physically weak. In retrospect, it is clear that Combs had caused a drug to be put into plaintiff's drink, and as a few sips of wine had never, she's saying as a few sips of wine had never impacted her that way. Combs and Sherman drove plaintiff to the Bad Boy Studio in Manhattan. When they arrived and plaintiff tried to get out of the car, she realized that she was feeling odd and found it difficult to walk. She assumed this was her fault and did her best to act normal and followed Combs as he led her eventually to a couch in a private room in the Bad Boy Studio. She later came to understand this was Combs' personal lounge and office at Bad Boy Studio. Combs sat on the couch next to plaintiff and continued speaking to her. Plaintiff began feeling even more woozy and sedated. She lost consciousness. Again, keeping this within the corporate entity. Now you're using the studio. So these are very much key details. None of this is accidental, folks. I'm talking about the details. And, based on the way that she is talking about the event, that the allegation is how this all went down, not accidental either. When plaintiff regained consciousness, she was naked and her hands were tied behind her back with what she felt like was a plastic grocery bag. She shouted for help, and in response, she was lifted up from the couch by Sherman and forcefully slammed face down on what was apparently a pool table. Shortly thereafter, Combs entered the room without clothes. He reached for a container of lubricant that smelled like menthol and proceeded to apply it to his private area. He then bent the plaintiff over the table, causing her feet to dangle above the floor, forcefully held her down, and at that point entered her anus. without her consent. Plaintiff is 4'11" tall and weighed only 103 pounds at the time. Plaintiff was unable to move, totally overpowered physically, in addition to being drugged and bound. Again, this only gets worse, folks. So if this is a trigger for you, then you might want to turn it down. I'm not going to say turn it away. You just might want to turn it down for maybe about the next 7 minutes. Plaintiff screamed out in pain, but Combs continued to violently assault her. He easily physically overpowered her, smashing her head down on the pool table while she futilely tried to wrangle out from under him. During the brutal attack, plaintiff vomited into her mouth and on the table. At one point, she involuntarily defecated. He was undeterred. He wiped himself off, applied more lubricant, and without any acknowledgement of her distress, he proceeded to enter her from the front, or vaginally. She experienced intense pain and burning sensations in both areas. She continued to scream for help because of the extreme pain she felt as Combs continued to do this over and over. She then lost consciousness again. The next time she regained consciousness, plaintiff, and again, this is still TG, was on the couch and Sherman was standing in front of her with his bare member in her face. He slapped her in the face forcefully and inserted it into her mouth. He slapped her yet again and continued to push himself into her mouth, and she once again lost consciousness. When she next awoke, plaintiff was on the couch without her clothes and alone in the room. She was in severe pain and distress. Both of her areas burned. Her face and wrists were her areas below the waist burned. Her face and wrists were bruised, and her genital area smelled strongly of menthol. She felt a liquid, presumably ejaculate, dripping out from inside of her. Her dress was thrown over her. Her purse was on the couch next to her, and her brassiere was on the floor nearby. She did not see her underwear. Terrified that they would return, she quickly dressed herself and bolted out of the studio where she was assaulted. Still dizzy and weak, she called a livery driver that her family regularly hired and knew very well. He picked her up from outside the studio. She was disheveled, crying uncontrollably, and suffering from agonizing pain. The driver drove her to a hospital and tried to convince her to report it and get a rape kit. But she was unable to leave the car, shaking and crying hysterically, and terrified of what Combs would do to her and her family if she reported it. The aftermath. She sustained, according to plaintiff, she sustained serious physical injuries in the aftermath of the assault. As noted, she had burning in both areas below the waist and bruising on her wrist and face. In the days after the assault, she suffered prolonged bleeding from her anus and hemorrhoids. Because of his power and notoriety, she was afraid to report what had happened. She was involved in a contentious divorce and custody battle at the time and feared that reporting the rape would cause her to lose custody of her child. Of course, from a legal perspective, certainly for whether this was prosecuted then or even from a civil perspective now, you would want the physical evidence. There's no question. Leaves a lot of doors open if there is no physical evidence. This doesn't say whether or not she took pictures of anything or whether or not she told anyone contemporaneous with the event. That would be helpful. Perhaps maybe if the livery driver, it could be located, but we're also talking about over 20 years and who knows what that situation is, whether or not they were a family friend or, like she said, just someone that they called in the course of business, etc. again, 20 years, life happens. Um, who knows? But I know if this were my case, I would definitely have a private investigator looking. If there is a friend that she had, even if they're not friends now, but they were friends then, and she told them about this incident, I would be looking for that person. These individuals are going to need to be found. It's going to be very, very important to her case. I'm not saying that she wouldn't be able to win the case without the physical evidence, but it definitely helps, especially given the amount of time that has passed, because you can't guarantee that a court isn't going to that a court is going to allow evidence of alleged other crimes. At this point, despite the numerous allegations against him, and even the settlement of the case with Cassie, despite those things, he has still not been convicted of any assault of this kind, no matter how many people say that he's done it to them. So the court may find that trying to introduce that information as some kind of a pattern is going to outweigh the, as they say, that the prejudice of that information would potentially outweigh the probative value of it. Now, granted, this isn't a criminal case, so things so information sometimes that is not allowed into a case. In a criminal case, obviously the stakes are higher because you're dealing with a person's freedom. Some of those things you can get away with a bit more in a civil case, especially one that is especially a serious civil case. So sometimes you can get away with them. But again, if the person hasn't been convicted of those things, then it's still just stuff you're saying to potentially get a jury to believe you so that you can get more money. That would be the argument. And so even if there were convictions, it was still going to be a fight to get them in. But without convictions, that one is tough. So his attorney is certainly going to attack this so-called evidence of prior offense, of prior bad behavior of this nature coming in front of the jury. And they already know, obviously, that they're going to try, that the plaintiff is going to try to do it because it's literally in their complaint. She, filled the complaint up already, even before getting into the specifics of this case, with talking about his allegations of assaultive behavior, both regular physical assault as well as sexual assault against women, and that he, just has overall bad behavior against women. A good attorney, or even attorney that just woke up in the morning and put their shoes on and dusted off their law degree, it's going to argue against that information coming in. Not to say it won't come in, but they've got to fight tooth and nail to keep it out. All right, so let's go deeper. What else do they have here? Okay, so she says that she did confide in her boyfriend, the Combs employee, hoping he would comfort and support her. But instead of supporting her, he discouraged her from disclosing the assault, telling her it would negatively impact his own career. Well, I hope that their relationship ended then. But something tells me he was probably still her boyfriend for a little while after that, because we know when people should end relationships, they don't always do so. More often than not, if it ends, is later just because or because of something else. not over something like this, like, oh, your boss assaulted me. Yeah, but don't say anything because that could mess me up, sis. Following the assault and multiple times over the years, both Combs and Sherman contacted plaintiff and warned her to be silent. It would be nice if she had some of that information, but who knows? And depending on how they contacted her, who knows if she kept it. And in traumatic incidences, especially when you don't plan to do anything, then you may not keep it. You may not keep any voicemails or ways for records to be found. But, if there's phone records that go back that amount of time, who knows? Because of their enormous power in the industry, including their ownership and positions at Combs Corporations, plaintiff knew they would follow through on their threats. Plaintiff told close friends that Combs and Sherman had drugged and savagely raped her. Now, see, this is the part that we need. If we are bringing this case, we need this. And the more of them that were back then, the better, because then it does appear more plausible, especially if in days, weeks, months, even in the first year after this happened to you, you were talking about it, and those individuals can give present sense impressions of not only how you talked about it, but what you appeared to be going through at the time as a result of it, which makes you more believable. Okay. She was even in, but as noted, was afraid to report it to the police out of fear that they would follow through on their threats. She was even afraid to stay in New York City while Combs lived there. So with the help of a friend, she fled to Pennsylvania. She has, in fact, relocated a number of times throughout the years in an effort to stay away from Combs. She suffered irreparable harm because of the brutal rape by defendants Combs and Sherman. She suffers from severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, she's been diagnosed with that and discussing it with a therapist. Definitely helpful to her case. She's also suffered thoughts of taking her own life and intrusive thoughts, and has attempted to end her life. Again, these are all things that certainly can be documented, and hopefully were documented if she was seeking any treatment before, during, and after any of these attempts or bouts where her depression or PTSD made it hard for her to function. She lives in constant fear. She struggles with hypervigilance and experiences anxiety and panic attacks in social settings, preferring to be alone. Her need to hide, to feel safe, has strained her relationships with family and friends. It's also impacted her ability to engage in sexual acts with intimate partners. And to this day, she cannot be in certain positions without experiencing flashbacks of what he allegedly did to her. Now, this brings us up to the present, this next section, and I'm going to paraphrase some of this. Bottom line is that back in November of 2023, she claims it all came back to her because her former boyfriend contacted her and told her for the first time that her situation, her attack, had been recorded and published, and maybe not necessarily published in the way that most people think of in terms of it being put out onto the open market, although who knows. But publishing could simply mean just conveying that recording to someone else. If it was sent from him to the next and to the next and to the next, that is enough for the purposes of publication. Earlier that month, so as we know, November, infamously, November 2023, that is when Cassie Ventura filed her suit, and the case talks about that. So there's a couple of paragraphs about that, and and of course, talks about how even Cassie Ventura's case talked about the pattern of videotaping things. And it also mentioned the bodyguard being around and involved in the group of men who would do these things to women, and the fact that there was a practice, some of this from the boyfriend as well, that there was a practice of non-consensually recording women engaging in acts and making those videos available to the public, including selling those tapes as pornography. And some people might say, well, we would have seen videos of Diddy by now if he was selling tapes of himself. But if you recall from the alleged freak-offs or FOs, he didn't always actively participate with the women. He was there, allegedly, but a lot of times staging the situations for his pleasure in terms of pleasuring himself, not actively participating, which means that if there were videos that had there were videos of these acts going on, he may have not necessarily been in them, although this particular one he allegedly was in. But again, you also have the fact that the bodyguard was allegedly involved. So the tape that was made or shown could have been during the portion when the bodyguard was assaulting her. Doesn't matter. We're going further down the rabbit hole, but the bottom line is it establishes this whole issue of the recordings and the fact that Diddy allegedly not only had a recording of this, but that he watched it, had other men watch it, and even kind of threw it up into it threw it up in the boyfriend's face to shame him into cutting ties with the plaintiff. So basically saying you want to continue to advance in this company, you quote unquote take out the trash, as if she's the problem. On information belief, the video continued to be shown throughout the years. That may be pure speculation, which is why they're saying on information and belief. And again, this would be coming from the boyfriend. She allegedly was shocked and horrified, and at that point went on began a physical and psychological decline, once again entertaining thoughts of hurting herself. And even at one point, it claims that she reached out to Sherman after learning about the tape, hoping to protect herself, and asking him to destroy it, but he didn't respond. That's probably not going to get them anywhere, even if she does show that she reached out to him, because if he didn't respond, then they'll be like, whatever, this is just somebody trying to set up a come up. The next part is a section that may or may not even get into this, but certainly a motion in limine, which is a motion to limit certain information, testimony, proposed evidence from coming into a case is going to be filed as it relates to all the stuff that's talked about in this section. And long story short, this section just talks about his alleged pattern of violence, going even as far back as talking about in 1996 when he was found guilty of criminal mischief for threatening a photographer from the New York Post with the gun. It even brings up the charges from the from beating up a record executive. We heard about that in '99. The arrest from the shooting at the nightclub, which, as we know, rapper Shine took the fall for, and also brings up the fact that the female victim of the shooting has consistently said that he is the one who shot her in the face. So again, it goes through all of this. It talks about the lawsuits. We've got the Joy Dixon Neal situation. So this stuff going all the way back to the early '90s. Liza Gardner. I mean, they did their homework, and then they bring it all the way up to the current cases. They also have former model Crystal McKinney, who sued back in May 2024 for, again, saying that she was drugged and assaulted in the studio. An adult former star, a former adult film star, Adria English, in July 2024, who made allegations. And then, of course, they mentioned Dawn Richard's case, which, as we know, was filed 2 weeks ago, and bringing it through to his current situation, where he is currently in jail, indicted for the sex trafficking and essentially the whole RICO situation. So they, of course, want all of this introduced because this inflames your trier of facts, that if he did all of that stuff to all of those people, then it's probably a likelihood that he did it to this person, especially when we don't have anything other than her word to say that he did it. Now, again, we will see whether or not there's anything else that can be produced. But right now, the best evidence, essentially, that this plaintiff has is not only her own testimony and hoping that the trier of fact, the judge or jury, finds her credible, but also the allegations of the acts towards other individuals that set up this pattern of violence and assaults and just horrible behavior towards women. So the first cause of action, violation of New York City Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act. So this is important because this is, first of all, it needs to be an act of violence. It's got to be gender motivated, which the allegation is because of his overall animus towards women, that this wasn't just, well, she just happens to be a woman, but I would have raped anybody. No, this is a pattern of behavior that you do based, at least in part, because she is a woman. Gender animus in hers when consent is absent. So essentially is inherent when consent is absent. So it's going to definitely be implied. Plus, again, that history of violence. And this is where there is a good shot of getting some of that testimony in, especially if any of those women, any number of them, even if it's just a couple of them, are willing to give testimony or be deposed in this case. Because if you're showing that a person did this because of a gender bias, then you need to be able to show that. And most people don't announce, hey, I hate women, so that's why I'm doing this to you. Hey, I hate men, so that's why I'm doing this to you. It is going to be a pattern. It's going to be their behavior. And it is not always just their behavior towards you. Because if it's just towards you, the argument can be, I don't have an issue with women. I just don't like that particular heifer. Okay. Defendants Combs and Sherman's rapes of plaintiff presented a serious risk of physical injury, of course. Again, they bring in the corporations and how they enable it, because again, you've got to make sure that the cause of action is not just them, but it is also against the corporations. So you have to show how the corporations are intimately connected to the event. Even if you don't believe that the actual event occurred, the way that the case has been presented, at least, and I'm just talking about the law, the way that the case has been presented from a legal perspective, just how boilerplate the person drafted it, they did a great job of showing how the business entity was just as much a part of the assault as the person who did it. They did a great job with that. So I don't think that that will be a reach for the court to find, especially given that the allegation is that it literally happened there, and that is the capacity in which they knew them and all of that great stuff. The issue is really going to be whether or not the trier of fact believes it happened. The next piece they talk about, and this is important, is the legal action has been commenced within the statutory time frame provided by the 2-year look-back window for VGMVPA claims. So let me just give you a quick primer on that. We talked about it a bit with the Cassie case, but just again, just to remind you all of what that is. So just the code section. So the New York City Administrative Code provides that victims of gender motivated, there is a law. It is the Victims of Gender Motivated Violence Protection Law. So that's the VGMVPL, also known as Gender Motivated Violence Act, allows survivors of gender motivated violence to pursue civil lawsuits against their abusers and institutions, important institutions, that enabled their abuse. That's usually important, especially when you're dealing with colleges and universities, for sure. The law applies to acts of violence that cause physical, emotional, and financial harm, including sexual assault and other related crimes. So that's how you get here with the civil. Even if the person, it does not require a underlying conviction, and that is huge. It does not require an underlying conviction. So you do not have had to go through the criminal process of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, which is great because that is a pretty high standard. And of course, as we know in civil lawsuits, the standard is preponderance of the evidence, which means just more likely it happened than it didn't. So you're good. So now, they also go through a declaration of legislative findings and intent, which is really an extraordinary piece of information that they included in the legislation, which just talks about the widespread, just how pervasive gender motivated violence is, and that as many as 4 million women a year in the United States alone are victims of domestic violence, and 3 out of 4 women will be a victim of a violent crime of some kind at some time during their lives. And so that is so that's where this comes from. And they go on and they define what those crimes of violence are. And of course, we know that that this type of assault falls under that. So yes, box is checked. Crime of violence motivated by gender means a crime of violence committed because of the gender or on the basis of gender and due at least in part on an animus based on the victim's gender, which is going to be that piece right there is again very helpful in getting in those prior bad acts, because you need to be, if you're saying that I am allowed to show that this animus is required, I need to be allowed, within reason, of course, to show it. And as a defense attorney myself, I would still be arguing tooth and nail about it getting in. But if it's going to get in, I'm still going to be fighting to the bitter end that you're not going to get in everything but the kitchen sink. If you've got a couple of instances of somebody, of him having a habit of calling people bitches, okay, that's enough. You don't need to bring in every drop kick, slap, allegation videos of him dragging people down the hall and all of that. And as horrible as it sounds, a good defense attorney would simply say, again, even that incident, if you try to bring it in, that doesn't necessarily mean that he has an overall animus against women because of their gender. That just means he is a crappy boyfriend and had an issue against that particular woman that he had this twisted relationship with. Doesn't mean he hated all women. Loves his mama, loves his daughters. Look at the wonderful things that he does for his daughters. Look at all the evidence of how much he loves his daughters on social media. Look at the evidence of how he treats and takes care of his mother and his sister, and even what they, and all the things that they're willing to do to help him. So there are counters to this. Okay, the civil cause of action. We know that you can get compensatory and punitive damages. Important. Compensate me for anything that I may have lost. Punitive damages. Now stick it to him for doing whatever he did to me. That's the punishment. Doesn't have to be based on anything but how bad you think this person needs to feel it. Injunctive and declaratory relief. Again, if there's anything that needs to be shut down, turned off, what have you. Kind of like in the Wendy Williams case, when we talked about the injunctive relief was when they tried to stop the show from airing. And of course, it was allowed to air. And the declaratory relief is just to say, okay, again, as I said in that case, shut down the contract. It doesn't exist. Special doesn't exist. You got to pull it. I don't think that's necessarily going to be an issue here. The only injunctive relief here would probably be no contact, permanent restraining orders type thing. The main thing here is going to be the compensatory and punitive damages, attorney's fees and costs, and any other relief. Now, this is the important part, the statute of limitations, and this is what made this act so significant. Notwithstanding any provision of the law, because, well, let me go back. A civil action under this act has to be commenced within 7 years. Okay, this allegedly occurred within 2001, which means that she would have needed to bring in action under normal circumstances by 2008. However, in 2022, a law was passed. I believe it was 2022. Yeah, on or about 20, around, let's see. Yeah, around 2022. May have even been late 2021. The law was passed in New York, because again, everybody has not done this. And it specifically says that notwithstanding any provision of law that imposes a period of limitation to the contrary, any civil claim or cause of action brought under this chapter that is barred because of the applicable period of limitation. So anything that would be barred because of that 8 years, and you're done. So up until this little caveat to the law was passed, she would have been done. brought under this chapter that's barred because the applicable period of limitation has expired is hereby revived and may be commenced not earlier than 6 months after and not later than 2 years and 6 months after September 1st, 2022. So long story short, because I know it gets a little, what's the 6 months after and all of it? Okay. Bottom line is until, what's the date? So September 1st, 2022, 2 years would be September 1st, 2024 plus 6 months. So September, October, November, December, January. So individuals who have barred complaints still have until February 1st, 2025, if my calculation of 6 months is correct, have until February 1st, 2025 to bring a claim. And so she filed this claim a couple of days ago, September 4th, September 24th, 2024, or at least that's when it was announced on September 4th, 2024. Let me see. Yeah, September 24th, because I'm looking at the top of the page. Yes. So she is within that limitations period. Now, so we know that she made the statute of limitations, so she's good there. Now, second cause of action, violation of New York civil rights law, that by assaulting her and recording it, they caused her to be depicted in a video image unclothed and with intimate body parts exposed and engaging in sexual conduct with another person in violation of New York civil rights law 52B. So the bottom, and they published and disseminated it. They allegedly continued to disseminate it. She was fully identifiable. So essentially, it's a roundabout way of saying that essentially they did revenge porn, and that violates her civil rights. Long story short, that's what happened. Third cause of action, violation of New York City Administrative Code, and again, recording and showing others doing what they did to her, disclosing an image outside of, without her consent. Defendants are covered recipients because they were recorded and caused the video to be recorded themselves. So again, and continuing. So there's more than one code that what they did, they basically recorded her themselves and disseminated it. And so, and showing that, showing those as it relates to another person, her being fully identifiable, again, violates the law there too. They intentionally disclosed and disseminated the video to her then boyfriend and other people, because the fact that they disseminated it was even worse. They intended to publish it. They intended to harass her, humiliate her, and all of those things. As a result of that, she suffered and continues to suffer emotional harm, including mental anguish, all of that. So she's violated it because their acts were malicious, willful, wanton, and outrageous. Then they're arguing she should get punitive damages for that as well. So for all of these violations, her civil rights, the New York Administrative Code, as it relates to the actual images, the recording of the images, the disseminating of the images, all of those things, and of course the gender-based violence. So there are several causes of action, which you can certainly do in a civil setting to make sure you're covered, because we do it all the time. There are several causes of action that these acts were fall under, especially when it comes to the actual harm. So you have the actual act of committing the violence against her. So there is that cause of action. And then you have the causes of actions that are triggered by the allegations of what they did. So, of course, they want the awarding of compensatory damages for all the physical injuries, emotional distress. So these are the things that I actually went through. So, for instance, when someone loses work or their ability to work, or this has a real impact on how they live their lives and how their lives would have been lived but for these things happening, that's compensatory. We're talking about the psychological harm, the anxiety, humiliation, physical and emotional pain and suffering. All of those things are your compensatory damages. Punitive damages is the punishment. This is the punishment to you for putting that person through that. So they want those things as well. Pre and post judgment interest, and of course, attorney's fees, and of course, the attachment of any and all property and assets which the law allows, because you want to make sure that if you get this award, the award can actually be paid. Of course, ordering them to account for and destroy all copies of any images, and awarding such further relief as this court may deem just and proper. So, interesting case in this regard, that because of where they filed it and how they filed it, even without direct physical evidence, other witnesses physically that saw it, some of the things that people insist you need to have, which cases are won and lost every day with or without those things. What is going to be very interesting about this case, especially if it's not settled and it progresses to court, is how much of the information about other people, and we've seen a lot of it that was actually a part of the breakdown of this case. It would have just taken forever to go through it all, but it was pages and pages. How much of that information is going to be allowed to be a part of the case? How many individuals that were named and some unnamed are going to be allowed to say things about Sean Combs that he hasn't technically been convicted of, and some these, may or may not have been settled out of court. Rumors, innuendo, things that may be said about other employees, the fact that he has this other case going on that involves stuff that includes allegations of violence against women. How much of that is going to be let in, and how much is the door allowed to be opened by the gender-based violence piece? That is going to be a very interesting, crucial, just can't say enough about it as it relates to this case. Her attorneys are going to be working overtime to use that as a way to get a lot of it in. So since it's a fairly new act, it's going to be incumbent upon them to find as much information as possible, whatever case law is available, and it just may be fairly limited and potentially untested on appeal, which of course his attorneys are going to appeal everything about everything that goes on in this case. This could be pretty groundbreaking in a lot of ways, because the more information the court lets in, the more fodder this will be for Diddy's attorneys to appeal the and of course, in appealing the case, it when especially something like this, it calls the entire act into question. And when you have more conservative courts, especially as you get into the higher echelon, especially going, as far up to the Supreme Court. New York's fairly liberal, but once you keep advancing into those higher courts and you get out of New York and you get into the circuits and all of that, it's going to be very interesting to see how far something like this can go when typically, especially on the criminal side, it tends to fly in the face a bit of what would be well-known evidence rules about uh, prior bad acts, and even more so bad acts that a person may not have been convicted of, but we're using them to just say he or she doesn't like people of the opposite sex because of the way that they behaved in, similar or maybe even entirely different settings, and we're going to punish them for it. Although it's civil, it's still a punishment. And, when you have someone who's ultra rich, I mean, yes, they care about going to jail, but trust me, they care about their money a whole lot more. You go to jail for a couple of years and you still got basically a fortune as a cushion when you come out. You figure out a way to make yourself live with it. So, and of course, obviously not every jail situation is created equally, because that's a little bit easier to say when someone is in a white collar situation as opposed to in a serious criminal felony type situation. And but all that being said, we will continue to watch as this unfolds. I don't doubt that there will be some movement on the criminal side of the case in fairly short order. And that, by the criminal side, I mean the federal case, in fairly short order, whether it's in this, additional indictments or just moves made on the behalf of Diddy by his attorneys, including adding to his legal team, which word on the street is he's adding to it. I wouldn't be shocked. As I said the other day, I'm not going to disparage his current attorney. It's just the bottom line is he's got money for his own version of the dream team. And Sean Combs has way more money than um, than O.J. Simpson could ever dream of, and if he had a dream team. And R. Kelly, who was practically, I don't know, does he even have any money? Did he have any money by the end? And he had a pretty good team as well. So Diddy, who for all intents and purposes right now still has a sizable fortune, yeah, he's going to have a dream team. And why wouldn't he? I mean, you would want one. You don't have to think he's the greatest person in the world, but at the same time, he is entitled to mount a defense. And so that's what he's going to do. That is it for tonight. We managed to do it in 90 minutes. This one was actually shorter than the Wendy Williams one, but still managed to do it and talk about some law while we were at it. So thank you once again for tuning in. If you are listening to this on the podcast, please make sure that you go to all of the cool places you like to listen to podcasts. Give us 5 stars, give comments, go to Apple, iTunes. Do all of those things. If you are on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. Join my socials. Join us over where we have a daily good time, a large group I think we're over 3,000 now, over and growing. On the FNDD on Facebook, where we do, I give you daily doses of pop culture and anything else that's going on. We also love fashion over there as well. So But so please join us. You will see links to all the socials below. I'm still adding companion episodes in the comments, so stay tuned, because as I upload the older episodes of the podcast onto YouTube, most are up, some are still loading. I will definitely be linking prior episodes that go along with whatever we're currently talking about. For instance, with this one, I'll link the Cassie Ventura episode with part one, which is Wendy Williams. Then I'll link the several episodes that we did uh, about how we got to the point of the guardianship, or how she got to the point of the guardianship and us just knowing about it. So, all of that being said, I thank you for hanging out with your girl, and we're looking forward to a lot more. The Starting After series is still very much alive and well, and part two of that will be coming up soon. I am looking so forward to continuing to share that story and journey with you as well. So, with that, I will sign off with what I always tell you, which is that if you're thinking about it, want to talk about it, have questions about it, then there's a pretty strong chance that I'm thinking about it and I want to talk about it too. So, you know what? Let's be honest together. Good night.